Thank you, Representative. I know we had a robust conversation about this in committee, but I actually had a question come up in between time that I haven't had the opportunity to ask. We did talk about the working group and the members on that, and you clarified with me that the youth who will be represented on that task force would be under 18. Is that correct?
Yes, they will be youth, yes.
Will they be required to get parental consent or notification to serve on that task force?
Not that I'm aware of. That's not part of the legislation.
Would it be similar to a field trip? I'm told other state agencies that have children under 18 on their task forces require parental consent.
I can find out the details on that, but I don't believe that would require consent or notification or anything like that. I mean, right now, most of us are meeting virtually via Zoom and doesn't require travel to begin with. So I would imagine this working group getting up and running will meet similarly via Zoom or some type of virtual format.
Okay, I think it's probably important to know that clarified before the end of the debate, if you could. To the bill, Mr. Speaker.
To the bill.
Thank you. It's a long-standing principle in this body and in our society and in the state that parents have the basic right to know what's happening in their minor child's life. In Illinois, there's a curfew, a law on the books that says if you have a child, the child cannot be out past midnight without the parent's consent, because we believe in this state that parents deserve to know where their children are, especially after midnight. That's consent, by the way, not notification. It's more strenuous than to receive an abortion without this bill. We also have laws that you've heard about. Can't get a tattoo without consent. Can't get a piercing without consent. Can't have a Tylenol at school. We talk about healthcare. They can't go to their school nurse and get a Tylenol without consent of their parents. Can't go on a field trip. Can't be on a state task force without consent. In fact, this body, just earlier this year, voted on House Bill 15, which was a good bill. We all voted for it, 114-0, twice. Voted for it the first time, voted for it when it came back on concurrence unanimously. And the sponsor of the bill succinctly, and I think very well, described the bill as, quote, parental notification would be required if a child at school is harmed or does harm to another student. And they would be required to be notified within 24 hours. And every single person in this body affirmed that. This is a basic case, not of parental control, which has been talked about by some on the other side of this issue from me, but it's about parents having the basic right to know what is going on in their minor child's life. It's so common sense. It's so common sense. We have a poll, which you've likely heard of, reputable polling firm, not a push poll, not some of these bogus things people do on campaigns, a legitimate poll says 72% of Illinoisans, a majority of those polled, by the way, self-identified as pro-choice, 72% of those Illinoisans said that parents or guardians should be notified if a minor girl, who's their daughter, is seeking an abortion. This isn't a partisan issue. It's not. It's not even down the lines of traditional pro-life and pro-choice lines. This is a basic common sense way for parents to know what's going on in their minor daughter's life. In fact, it's so basic. I've got a list here. If you ask me, what do these states have in common? Colorado, Delaware, Rhode Island, Virginia. You know what they all have in common? A few things. They all have a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic governor. And you know what they also have in common? Colorado, Delaware, Rhode Island, Virginia, along with 33 other states, require that a parent be notified or give consent before their minor daughter receives an abortion. Those aren't exactly these scary, crazy Republican states that you guys like to talk about. That's how common sense this protection is. I'd also like to point out that parents obviously have a right to know when their child is undergoing a serious medical procedure. We talked about this briefly in committee, and I gave you the example. If my child broke their arm, needed to go get their arm set, I would want to know, and I would have the right to know. And it came up, one of the people testifying, a witness, offered that an abortion is so much more serious, so much different. To which I said, of course it is. Of course it is. A parent, obviously, if your child's having their tonsils taken out, setting a broken arm, ruptured appendix, of course the parent has the right to know what's happening. But an abortion has so much more an impact on a minor daughter's mental and physical health than a broken arm. If a parent deserves to know about a broken arm, then holy cow, they deserve to know if their daughter's considering an abortion. And I also want to talk about the contention in committee that the only people who would oppose this bill must want there to be no abortions, which the poll we've already talked about proves that's not the case. But I'll tell you what, for parents who've been notified that their minor daughter is considering an abortion and they support it, they support that decision, I want them to know. I want them to be able to drive their daughter to the abortion clinic. I want them to be there to care for that daughter afterwards. I want them to know just as much as I want a parent to know who may be pro-life, who may vehemently disagree with that decision, but I still want them to support their daughter in that decision. I want them to be there for them. That's what this bill requires, that the parents have the opportunity to know what's happening in their daughter's life. There's been a lot of conversation, especially in committee, about how broken the PNA is, the Parental Notification of Abortion. It's a very short bill. I would hope that everybody in this chamber has read this by now, but I wanted to point out a few things, because it seems to be that the major point of contention with this bill is with the judicial bypass. And there's been a lot of misinformation about what is required of a judicial bypass. So I want to read it. Exemptions to parental notification. So in all of these cases, parental notification is waived. If the minor is accompanied by a person entitled to notice, the parent takes them to the clinic, no need to notify. Notice is waived in writing by a person who is entitled to notice. Parent writes a note, says, you don't need to notify me, I already know. Good to go. The attending physician certifies that the patient's medical record and that medical emergency exists, and there is insufficient time to provide the required notice. This came up in committee today, that it could be that it's delayed so long through the bypass that they're unable to receive the abortion, or that it's an emergency. The plain text of the language says that's not the case. It would already be waived. The minor declares in writing that she is a victim of sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse by an adult family member as defined in this act. This attending physician must certify in the patient's medical record that he or she has received the written declaration of abuse or neglect, and it goes on. So for those who are experiencing the horrible, horrible situation that they have been abused, neglected, the whole list, they don't have to go through the judicial bypass, and they don't have to notify their parents. And I'd like to add to that, they don't ever have to notify their parents. The body that does the notification is the clinic. It's not the daughter. We don't force the daughter to call the mom and tell them. We don't. This isn't what was described in committee as cruel. We're not being cruel. We're allowing parents basic knowledge of a serious medical procedure that their daughter is contemplating. And they don't have to tell their parents. It's the clinic that does it. I'd like to talk a bit about girls who aren't in this state. We obviously swear to uphold our state constitution and serve our citizens of Illinois. But we have a much bigger responsibility in this bill. Today we heard from a clinic in the Metro East that said 50% of their minors come from out of state, most of which come from states with parental notification or parental consent, meaning it's the will of those states that parents have basic rights to know. If this bill passes, I can only expect that that number will increase from 50%, meaning that the bill you're voting on today will mean that parents states away, potentially, have no opportunity or right to know that their minor daughter has come to Illinois for an abortion. And when I talk about minor daughters, I want to put this into context. Before the RHA, we got reports on the age. And this might sound actually pretty extreme to say, but we have examples of 12-year-olds receiving abortions in Illinois. 12-year-olds. We're not talking about 17-year-olds exclusively who are months away from being 18. We're talking about middle schoolers, potentially. Parents of middle schoolers not having the right to know that their daughter is going through this, and not having the full knowledge to know what happens afterwards, right? She has that procedure. Something goes wrong, she's depressed, they have no context, no knowledge of why that's happening. So today, all I'm asking for you is to be consistent. Be consistent with the votes after votes that you've taken that have allowed parents basic knowledge and involvement in their minor children's life. That's all. Because for much as you want to write a big political statement about what you did to support women, voting for this is failing girls. And it's failing good parents. We've seen a lot of hyper-partisan talk in this country about parents' rights recently. I acknowledge that. But there is nothing more basic than a parent and child relationship where the parent has the right to know what's happening. Not to control it, not to make the decision for the daughter, but to know. Please be consistent. Please vote no.